in remotest village of Rajasthan.
How suffering of a woman changed the life of every working woman in India.
It was 1997. A court in India did something unusual. In the absence of any law, it made one.
Welcome to Deep Dive. I am Faiz Imam, a law student at Chanakya National Law University. And today we are going to discuss a very important case of international law, Vishakha versus State of Rajasthan. This story starts in a village of Rajasthan. Her name was Bhauri Devi. She was not a lawyer. She was not an activist with a platform, but she was a Sathi, a community worker employed by the government of Rajasthan under the Women's Development Program. The irony is that the state had employed her to protect women from child marriage, but the state itself could not protect a woman who was trying to protect a child marriage. Every day she walked into the villages like this one to stop child marriages, to tell families that their daughter matters, their daughter deserves to live. Simply, that was her job, but it became a crime. In 1992, she learned that a family in her village was planning to marry off their 1 year old daughter. Of 1 year old daughter. Bhauri Devi intervened. She reported it. She tried to stop it. The family was from an upper class. They saw her intervention as an insult from a woman of lower caste who dare to challenge their authority. And this is where that changed everything for this case. On the 22nd September 1992, Bhauri Devi was brutally gagged in her own village in broad daylight. Her husband tried to stop them, but they kicked him away. She reported this crime. She fought for her case. She went to the police, but the police denied to file her complaint.
Woman was raped and no case was registered despite her approaching the cops. "20% of the population are born into the bottom of the caste ladder, which dictates where they can work, whom they can marry, and even where they can bathe. Above all, it's women who bear the brunt of discrimination.
That law enforcement, often staffed by upper caste men, frequently ignore crimes committed against Dalit women.
But Bhauri Devi in this case persisted.
So the case went to the lower court. The court acquitted all 5 men. They stated reason, lack of sufficient evidence. There are some failures which are so profound that they demand an answer. An answer in this case came from a woman who refused to stay silent. Aggrieved by the acquittal and by the complete silence of Indian law on sexual harassment, a group of women, activists, lawyers, NGOs came together under the name of Vishakha. Vishakha was not just a name, it was a declaration. It was a declaration that we can't stay silent for atrocities that happens with women in working place. Vishakha in this case filed a writ petition directly before the Supreme Court of India under Article 32 of the Indian Constitution. Their argument was not just about Bhauri Devi. It was about every woman who had ever gone for work and been made to feel that the law did not see her. Now, I want you to understand what was actually missing in 1997. India had the penal code, it had labor laws, it had a constitution that guaranteed equality to every citizen. But there was not a single law that specifically addressed sexual harassment at workplace. A woman could be harassed, humiliated, coerced at her own desk. But the law had no specific language for what had happened to her. That vacuum, that silence in the law is what this case walked into. Article 32 of the Constitution is what B.R. Ambedkar called the heart and soul of the Constitution. It gives every citizen the right to approach Supreme Court directly when their fundamental rights have been violated. And Vishakha used it on behalf of every working woman in India. Senior advocates including Shri Fali S. Nariman appeared as amicus curiae, friend of the court, to assist in finding a solution. The Solicitor General of India himself helped shape the outcome. The stage was set. The question before the court was not small. It was this: in the absence of law, what is the court's duty? The petitioners built their argument on 6 pillars of Constitution. Article 14, the right to equality before the law. Article 15, the prohibition of discrimination on grounds of sex. Article 19, 1 clause G, the right to practice any profession or occupation. Article 21 says the right to life, which the court would interpret as the right to life with dignity. And Article 42, the state's duty to provide just and humane working conditions. Article 51AE says the fundamental duty of every citizen to renounce practices derogatory to the dignity of women. Taken together, these provisions created an argument that was impossible to ignore. Sexual harassment at the workplace didn't just hurt a woman, it violated her constitution. It violated her dignity. Article 21 is the one on which I want to draw your attention, the right to life. In the Constitution, it reads simply, no person shall be deprived of his life or personal liberty except according to procedure established by law. But the Supreme Court over decades had expanded that to mean the right to live with dignity. And here is what the court said in the case of Vishakha. A woman who cannot go to work without fearing a harassment is not living with dignity. Her right to pursue a profession under Article 19, 1 clause G becomes meaningless without a safe working place to exercise it. Though the current data in India about the condition of women is still devastating, that single interpretative step was the one that gave this case its constitutional force. The court was clear about this one thing. The primary responsibility to protect a working woman belongs to the legislation. Parliament should have acted on it, but it had not. Chief Justice J.S. Verma, writing for the bench, observed, when the legislature is silent and the fundamental rights are being violated, the judiciary cannot remain a spectator. But the act showed the same intention. Here is where this case becomes significant, because the Supreme Court did not stop at the Constitution. It looked outward to the international law and what it did next, how Indian courts relate to the world. Here is where it gets really interesting from the perspective of public international law. India operates under a dualist system. It means it cannot bring international law into domestic law until it passes through the legislature. That means international law cannot become a domestic law automatically simply because India signs them. The parliament has to step in and legislate, but parliament had not. So the court did something creative. It said, in the absence of domestic law, international conventions that are consistent with the constitution must be read into fundamental rights, not as a replacement for legislation, but as an interpretative bridge. Just to bring it to your attention, India had ratified CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, in 1993. CEDAW's General Recommendation 19 specifically recognized sexual harassment at the workplace as a gender discrimination. India had to make that commitment to the world. The court said, now it's the time. Read that again. The court is saying the constitution is not a closed document. It breathes, it expands. And international law, when it is in harmony with our fundamental rights, can be the bridge that expands it.
That is why this case is studied in international law courses, not just in family law, not just in labor law, but in international law. Three of the guidelines given in this case deserves a particular attention. First, every employer was placed under a duty to prevent harassment, not to respond to it after the fact, but to prevent it. This was not optional, this was legal obligation. Second, the court ordered the creation of a complaints committee at every single workplace, and there is the detail that matter. It must be headed by a woman. It must have at least half of its member as a woman, and it must include a third party NGO member specifically to prevent institutional pressure from silencing the victim. And third, this one is often overlooked. Even when the harasser is a client, an outsider, a vendor, the employer is still responsible. The court makes sure that the workplace does not become a shield from the law. For us as the student of public international law, Vishaka is a masterclass in something very specific. How an international law becomes a domestic law when the legislature has not opened the door. The court's answer in this case was elegant. It used Article 51C and 253 of the Constitution, provision that connects India's lawmaking powers to connect with international obligations, and said, CEDAW is not just a promise India made to the world. It is a lens through which we must read our own constitution. The code made international norms immediately operative, without waiting, without asking, without any permission, but a judicial courage. And it is the reason that this case will be read, followed, discussed, and cited long after we have left the law school. Thank you so much for listening. This was a deep dive on the international law case, Vishaka versus State of Rajasthan. Signing off.